there's at least 12. Oh, sure. I mean, how many did you need? Okay.
How are you? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our special San Francisco Board of Supervisors meeting of January 7th, 2015. Want to welcome everyone to the new year and hope everyone had a wonderful holiday season. Before Madam Clerk calls the roll, I'd just like to welcome, we have a former mayor here, Mayor Frank Jordan. Welcome to our chamber. And Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam President. Supervisor Avalos.
Present.
Avalos present. Supervisor Breed. Breed present. Supervisor Campos.
Present.
Campos present. Supervisor Cohen. Cohen present. Supervisor Farrell.
Present.
Farrell present. Supervisor Kim. Kim present. Supervisor Marr.
Here.
Marr present. President Tang.
Present.
Tang present. Supervisor Wiener.
Present.
Wiener present. Supervisor Yee.
Present.
Yee present. Madam President, you have a quorum.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Will you please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Madam Clerk, are there any communications?
Yes, Madam President, we have one. As you know, on December 16th, the Board approved an extension for the emergency declaration related to the room fire, which expires January 15th unless renewed. We are in receipt of a correspondence from Mayor Edwin Lee today, January 7th, communicating the third declaration of a local emergency related to the rim fire pursuant to Charter Section 3.100 and Administrative Code Chapter 7, and further communicating that this matter will be placed on the without reference portion of the agenda for January 13th next week.
Thank you. And now let's hop right into it. Let's please call item number 1.
Item number 1 is a motion approving or rejecting the mayor's reappointment of Wendy Paskin Jordan to the Retirement Board for Seat 4 for a 4-year term ending February 20th, 2019.
Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you, and thank you, colleagues, for coming together today to hear this appointment. This has been a real challenging appointment to weigh in on for me, and I would guess for all of us. We have a commissioner on the San Francisco Employees Retirement System Board who comes with a great deal of expertise and experience looking at financial matters there, has been on the SFRs for a number of years already, and has come with her experience working with her own firm. There have been recent ethics complaints that have come forward over the last year that have swirled around providing some controversy around her reappointment. And I did feel it was important that we look at these. If there are some real issues that are part of these ethics complaints, that we should have some pause and have some scrutiny here at the board before making an appointment for making her reappointment. And this has been actually very, very challenging for me because I want to honor the work that someone has given already to SFRs. Many, many hours of in commission meetings, in interaction with the public, and taking time out of her own work to be able to do this. So it's been very uncomfortable to be in this position to actually question some of the work she's done. I've also had issues that have been important for me that I've been working with the Retirement Board on, in particular, divestment from fossil fuels. We've actually passed a resolution unanimously in 2013 that was urging the Retirement Board to divest from fossil fuel companies. And since that resolution passed, I think it was April of 2013, there's been very limited work that's been done on moving that forward, and yet my office has still been part of engaging with the Retirement Board to see if we can actually move to some level of effort in that area of divestment from fossil fuel. We've also had other matters that have come up that the board has approved, I think divesting from companies that are in the country of Russia. Russia has a very terrible human rights record when it comes to LGBT community in Russia, and we've asked the retirement board to also look at that issue as well. And we haven't necessarily seen the board, who actually has the responsibility over the retirement board system, not us, to make those decisions. There have also been concerns about the board's investment in hedge funds that I think the people from the public here are here to discuss as well. That gives some controversy as well to positions that the retirement board has taken on, positions that are not just about where Ms. Wendy Paskin-Jordan sits on, but the entire board itself. So I think singling her out on these particular issues is not necessarily fair to all the members to her, when all the members of the board share an equal responsibility in making sure that policy issues that we put before the retirement board, get carried out, as we would like. So I've actually had 2 conversations now with Ms. Paskin-Jordan. I talked with her on the phone before we had our discussion at the full board, our last full board meeting, and I sat down with her yesterday as well. And actually really enjoyed my conversations with Ms. Paskin-Jordan, and felt that she's a very, very charming person, someone who has a great deal of expertise, as I said, in financial matters, investment matters that are before the retirement board, and I think someone who really is, in a good place to serve the city as well. There are a few remaining issues that I would like to be able to discuss, and with Ms. Paskin-Jordan here today, they're issues that we've actually discussed already. But what I would like to see, if I'm actually fairly comfortable supporting her continuing on the retirement board, based on my conversations with her. But what I'd like to see, if there's a greater level of effort that we can have from her and other members of the retirement board system to look at the divestment issues that we've talked about, as well as how we can get a better sense of some transparency that we could have perhaps over the use of investments in hedge funds. So if Ms. Paskin-Jordan, if you are able to have her come to the podium, would be interested in your thoughts, and if other colleagues have comments, certainly we can hear them before hearing from Ms. Paskin-Jordan.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. I'd like to first acknowledge Supervisor Campos, and then, if we can take without objection, allow Ms. Paskin-Jordan to have the floor after that. Without objection. Okay. Supervisor Campos first.
Thank you, Madam President. And I do want to thank Mrs. Paskin-Jordan for being here. And I want to thank all the members of the public who have come out to speak on this item, both in favor or against the appointment. Let me say that for me, process is important, and I want to thank my colleagues who supported my motion to have a special meeting to provide this nominee the opportunity to come and speak. I don't want to prejudge any issue. I think that as a matter of process, the way that appointments work is that once the mayor makes an appointment, there is a window of time during which the board has an opportunity to raise questions or concerns, and then that appointment goes before the Rules Committee, where these kinds of questions can be raised. In this case, though, the mayor made the appointment and proceeded to swear in the individual without really giving the board the opportunity to have the item heard in committee, at the Rules Committee, where these kinds of questions could be raised. And I think that irrespective of the substance of what happened or didn't happen, it's important to respect the process, to make sure that any questions that arise are discussed openly. And so I look forward to hearing from Wendy Paskin-Jordan about the specific ethics questions that have been raised. Everything that I know of her and have heard of her is that she is a hardworking, ethical person. But I think that we have a responsibility to make sure that members of the public, not just members of this board, but members of the public hear directly a response to the ethics questions that have been raised. So it is with that, in that spirit and with that intent that I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, Ms. Paskin-Jordan.
On. There we go. I don't know if any of you want to, because I'm up for reappointment, maybe I should just address my background and experience in the area and then maybe address some of the issues. Is that a good idea? So I'll just go back. I think I'm a protege of my parents. And just kind of, I think giving you a little bit of background about me tells you how I look at life and how I look at serving on boards and why I do this. I was raised by two parents who did not have college educations. My mother was an orphan and went through a lot of difficulties in her life, was raped at the age of 8, and lived in Canada and fled into the United States and started her life at age 14. She started working hard, as anybody does as an immigrant here, and she became a buyer at a store and rose her way up and gradually became the woman she is, which was somebody who could golf in the 90s, and she could ride English saddle, and she could ride a Harley, which she did. My father was a machinist, and that was his background. He didn't have an education, Jewish kid, grew up in Chicago, beaten up plenty of times for his religion. And they both in third marriages came and had my brother and myself. So from that background, I was raised in public schools, never had any private schools in my education. I went to the infamous school that Hilary Swank did a movie on in Long Beach, which was probably one of the worst schools there was as a public school. Graduated, went on to Stanford to send myself through Stanford. I became the first woman beach lifeguard in California, in the LA County. There were 1,000 men and myself. And so I had to push against obstacles. That was in the 70s when there are no women in the police and fire, and LA County lifeguards was part of the fire department. So that was my background. I had to do everything on my own. And in many of those cases, in a world dominated by men. And my parents just led with a good work ethic and just said the highest integrity. My grandfather was Walter Reuther's vice president of the auto union. He was banned from every union there was for his efforts as a union organizer. He wasn't able to get a job. So, that was my grandparents' background. A tough background, but good for myself because it actually made me understand how to work and get ahead and achieve. I ended up going to Stanford. I worked as a lifeguard on the beaches. I did work Baywatch and paid my way through school. I had a lot of student loans, came to San Francisco, ended up going to law school here, once again, living on student loans and maybe an income of $3,000-4,000 a year. I ended up being housed in low and moderate income housing, worked my way up. Again, a lot of student loans, ended up going to not just law school, but business school. Came back out and focused on the investment area. And so 30 years ago, I was hired to start some of the first mutual fund areas in Wells Fargo Bank. And later on, moved my way up, became a managing partner in Montgomery Securities, tough firm, not many women, probably one of the first managing directors there. So my background has been in investments. And I've also served the community. I've been on the board of Planned Parenthood, on the board of Outward Bound, did the first fundraiser for Friends of the SF General, and numerous other boards. So I've been involved in that. When I had this opportunity to come on the retirement board, I actually said no when I was offered that, because I thought it's so much work. It's so hard. It's controversial. You have a lot of weight on your shoulders because these are retirees and these are pensioners and these are current employees. And the stock market is a tricky game. But I've been in many areas in the stock market. I know a lot of things that don't work and work. And I feel like that is one of the contributions I've been able to make to the San Francisco Retirement Board. I've also served on Barclays Global Index Fund, which is one of the largest indexers in the world. I was brought on that board, mentored by Leo Song, who is the Song family. I think most of you know his mother, and the Song sisters were pretty famous for their backgrounds as women in the 1900s to come into this country. He then brought me on a couple other boards. They were paying boards, and this is probably now one of my only not-for-profit boards. This probably takes the most time for me of all of them, because there's a lot to learn, a lot to know, and a lot of meetings to go through. As far as the hedge fund area, I can start with that as an area. I did not vote to move ahead on hedge funds. My vote was actually to slow down the process. I asked the chief investment officer to come back to the board with exact managers that he would want to use, because there are good hedge funds and there are bad hedge fund managers. The pension fund lost 30% in 2008. There are pension funds that did use hedge funds that lost 1%. So we don't want to be closed-minded to it, but I've also worked in that area and understand that there are a lot of pitfalls.
Just a question related to that. Mm-hmm. Paskin Capital Advisors invest in hedge funds. Is that correct?
We don't invest in hedge funds direct. We use a very low risk hedge funds manager that, in order to hedge the portfolio, so I have experience with this particular group, but they're very small. They wouldn't be the kind that the pension fund could use. Is
there anything in your work, Paskin Capital Advisors work with hedge funds through an intermediary that could perhaps create any conflict of interest with investments that SFRs makes?
Not that I see. And if there was one, as I have a history of stepping out and saying that if I feel there's a conflict, I've always taken the side of I'd rather leave and leave the committee and let them vote on it. I will not vote on that, and I have a history of that on the board. It's one of the reasons when I was brought up onto Zephyrs and asked to do this is one of the things I asked the city attorney. And they really felt high net worth people are people who buy municipal bonds, which the city doesn't do. They're smaller. They can't get into the products many of the products that actually the city can. But if there is a conflict, I have, and there's been times when I have said I felt there is. Voting on a bank stock, I stepped out.
You step out on those. Mm-hmm. So right now, I believe it's being RFP'd out, the custodian contract for SFRs. Right now it's with Northern Trust.
Right.
Does Paskin Capital Advisors have a relationship with Northern Trust?
I do have a relationship with Northern Trust. I work in the trust department, which is way different than what San Francisco works with, which is the custodian area and the securities lending area. However, I have told staff years ago when I first came on the board, if there is an issue with Northern Trust, I would still like to recuse myself.
So does that, now that there's an RFP going out and Northern Trust, I believe, has applied among other trusts, would that be something that you would recuse yourself from in terms of the vote for approving the RFP?
I would likely recuse myself on something like that only, and this is in a rare circumstance, because I actually have I've spent so much time on the trust side of the bank that I've just felt that it'd be better and safer not to have to vote on it. Doesn't mean I can't make comment on it. and divulge any of the issues that I see that's occurred at Northern Trust. But their areas against securities lending and custodian area is exactly opposite than the areas that handle, little blue-haired ladies in the bank. Very, very different.
Thank you. So we talked yesterday as well about some of the requests that we've been making, the board, and then through our engagement with committee members and my office directly with the retirement board around divestment from fossil fuel. And we spoke, and you mentioned that you had been supportive of studying the issue, perhaps. There was a vote that actually was about engagement in level 1 and level 2, efforts for the retirement board, which were certain levels of, efforts looking towards divestment, which you didn't support. You support studying. Could you explain why you thought studying the issue would be more important than actually doing actual level 1, level 2 type of?
So fossil fuels, I should tell you, a little bit about my background in that area is that I have spent a fair amount of time in the environmental area. I actually have worked with Conservation International, traveled around the world, drive a Prius. It's an important issue to me. I've hit hotspots. I've gone into Africa in areas where they have microloans in order to not have timber destruction. I've actually been very involved in that area. The reason that I asked to study it, and I actually seconded the motion to go to level 1. And on top of that, I actually asked the staff to look into, number one, what the environmental foundations are doing. We have 2 of the top environmental foundations that are in the Bay Area, the Gordon Moore Foundation, which my husband worked at for 12 years.
If I may, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but we have from the minutes from October 29th, 2013, that at the meeting you voted against Supervisor Cohen's motion to implement level 1 and level 2 engagements, that you voted against that, but that you supported a motion to study level 1. So my question was why you chose to study versus actual, engagement.
Engagement. Because I think it's important to, in fossil fuels, there are many, many degrees of harmful areas in fossil fuels. As you and I talked about, I would like to study and take steps with some of the worst areas in fossil fuels, like maybe coal and things like that. So I think the board needs to understand all the research in that area rather than just going out and not being prepared to advocate and actually vote on proxies, which is level 2. I think you really have to have the board become much more knowledgeable in that area. I have, for San Francisco, attended conferences in that area, and I just got back from one to understand what other universities, what other pension funds are doing in that area. They actually, none that I know of, have gone to level 2. So I think that starting out level 1 is very prudent, and I believe I seconded the motion, Director Hewish, to go to level 1. So I have nothing...
To study level 1?
Yeah, to
study.
No.
Actually, we pulled it from the notes. So and you haven't read the notes correctly, because I've actually seen the notes verbatim, and they mentioned that it's an effort to study level 1. And then when it came to a vote, which happened on February 19th, that you weren't present at the meeting for that vote, according to my notes here as well.
Yes.
And
the February 19th vote was actually on level 1 engagement, which...
So colleagues,
the
at
director
this time,
speak?
I would like to just make known that we do have Director Jay Hewish here from the Retirement Board, as well as Karen Bortnick. So if colleagues have any questions, Director Hewish.
To clarify the record, there was a vote in October to study it, and then there was later a special meeting called at which Commissioner Paskin-Jordan was present, and she seconded the motion that actually covered the Carbon 200 folks, the companies, under the board's social investment policy. So there were 2 meetings, one meeting at which there was not a successful vote of the board to engage at any level, and then there was a special meeting in February at which Commissioner Paskin-Jordan was present. In fact, she seconded the motion and voted in favor of the motion to engage the companies.
Okay, thank you. I have in my notes different from that, but we can choose to look over that.
Yeah, I think the main point, which is the intent, is that I've actually made extra efforts to attend and be involved in that because it's an area that it was perplexing. I actually went with another commissioner out. The Kennedys are big advocates in the environmental area. We went out to Boston and were invited with other foundations and pension funds. And as I was telling Supervisor Avalos, it was a little distressing that people hadn't stepped forward more in the largest pension funds that have $200 billion, like New York and areas like that, and gone to level 2 or gone to level 3. So I feel we need to find out why that's the case. But I would advocate that. I think it's a good idea. And I think you don't move ahead rashly. You need to understand the areas to make, to have beneficial results. I think you can take little steps and move ahead. And we probably could be at the forefront of that.
Okay, so I'm hearing from staff that it's in the notes that you were not present at the February 19th meeting to be able to second a level 1 engagement. Now, you may have seconded a vote for studying, which is what my original question was right now. Mm-hmm. But so my staff is bringing the notes, and really, I just want to make sure we're being accurate about what happened, and I'm trying to work off what were originally notes that came from the minutes from the SFR's meeting. So I feel like what I've been presented, what I've been told and put before me has been accurate.
I think there was a special meeting.
Yes, we're verifying that with the Commission Secretary, but there was a special meeting held at the Health Commission at 101 Grove. I
actually didn't attend that meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. I did not attend that meeting. I was out of town. I wanted to attend that meeting.
Okay. So we'll confirm that.
Yeah.
We're getting a confirmation on
and
that now.
Because I know that I wanted to attend that meeting. They asked for, our president asked for a date, and once he had a quorum, he decided to move ahead and have the meeting that day. But I tried really hard to get at that meeting.
Okay, thank you. And then my question is, Mr. Director Hewish, is how could you contend that she had seconded the motion if she wasn't at the meeting? I mean, how you would verify this information before you would present it here at the full board, I would imagine. So I'm a little bit...
We're confirming whether, in fact, the motion was made and that was seconded by Commissioner Paskin-Jordan. If she was not at that meeting, my recollection was it was at that special meeting.
Yeah, it wasn't at that
special meeting. The motion was to engage at level 1. So the information, we're having that verified, but she was not in attendance at that meeting.
Yeah, I think the intent was, and again, there was an original meeting that was at our board, and this is what I remember because it was a while ago. And I remember standing up and saying, I'd like to go to level 1, but I would really like us to move another step forward and find out what environmental foundations are doing. Because if they're not doing that, we need to understand why. I mean, when you have a $7 billion foundation, that's the biggest environmental foundation in the world, that isn't doing that, we need to know why. And that's why I would advocate to understand that. And it doesn't mean that we can't take a step forward, but I am not against doing this process and moving ahead in the process.
And I appreciate that. I do want to make sure that the work that the SFRs has already done towards divestment can continue, and that you are able to take some leadership, on that to a greater extent than, folks have actually on the commission have actually taken so far, especially with your expertise that you have, your relationship you have in people in firms that are looking at environmental outcomes for investments as well.
Right.
Is that something you can commit
yes.
to?
Yes, and I think the other thing that I did do at that meeting is one of the greatest investment experts in the world is Jeremy Grantham. And he is an advocate of trying to understand fossil fuels and their impact on the world. He's a big believer. We do have that particular fund in the portfolio, and which is called Grantham, Mayo, and Otterloo. And he's done a good job at pointing out areas that we actually have possibilities to work a little harder in, which again are the dirty area of fossil fuels, the coal area. It doesn't mean we have to go across the board, but we could start somewhere. And so I did that in the public session, also advocated that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that, reasons why we looked at fossil fuel divestment from just purely financial point of view was that we knew as climate change was happening and regulations were starting to kick in on fossil fuel, search and development, that the cost of producing, some of the hard to get to fuels would skyrocket, or there would also be some great volatility we would see in the market, and then there would, what we're seeing across the globe right now, from OPEC to producers here in the United States, that there's a lot of conflict moving on to try and make the prices change, and we've seen the market, the price of a barrel of oil has gone down below $50 from $100. It's the lowest it's been, I think, about 4 years. We're seeing the market now look. Investments go down because of the volatility in the market, and what is being predicted is something that we expect that's going to continue, going down for years to come, probably forever, moving forward. So it does make a lot of financial sense that we pull, our public dollars out of, these industries that are looking at having very fluctuating types of returns. And so that to me was like a really important reason why, looking forward, we're actually now seeing take effect in the financial markets. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, again, I think that you and I talked about this, that one of the things Jeremy Grantham said is these are depleting resources, and it's costing us more and more money to take things out of the ground. It's very easy the first time when areas are new, like fracking, but then as time goes on, it will cost us more and more money, and we won't have those resources in the future. So I think that spending more time with him, because he is one of the best investment people in the world, and understanding how to do that, we could take a leadership role in that. And I'd like to actually spend more time doing it. When I did go with Commissioner Bridges out to the Kennedy compound for the conference, and they had probably 60 representatives from around the country. It was distressing in one sense. We both said, this is distressing that people really haven't taken a lead in this area. But then again, we have to find out why. I mean, why are the $200 billion pensions that are at the forefront not moving quicker on this? And I think it's the same issues of South Africa. It's the same issues as they start with little steps and they move, and when one does it, then others do it. But you've got to have the information behind you to do it. I think if you're going to tell the retirees and the employees you're going to take something out of the portfolio like that, which we've done in the Sudan with tobacco, it didn't happen overnight. I think people studied it, advocated it, went to level 1. But it's a passionate interest of mine, as I said, because I have been involved in that area, and I have traveled around the world with Conservation International to hotspots all over the world. So it's not just been something passé. I've given money in that area. It is something that I'm actually involved in. So I think I will take a little more leadership in that position on Zephyrs.
Thank you. I'll let any colleagues who want to ask questions.
Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, President Tang. Thank you for being here today and answering our questions, and thank you for reaching out to many of my colleagues and myself yesterday. In regards to this issue of divesting from fossil fuel, after speaking to you yesterday, I realized how complicated this issue is. And at the same time, my frustration in this is not knowing what the next steps are, whether we're going to be taking this seriously or not. And there's no indicators for me. So, and yes, we could study it, and you've been studying it for a little while. Maybe you need more time, which is fine. But I'm just wondering, can you be a leader in this and saying, look, at some point we have to make some decisions. Let's give ourselves a timeline so that, at least for me personally, I would feel like some satisfaction that there's actually some goals you're setting for, rather than, are they going to actually do anything at all? That's what I would appreciate.
Yeah.
And so my question for you is, would you be willing to take a leadership role in trying to do that?
I would do that, and I've actually, I would need to talk to our president of the commission, because he basically runs the board right now. But I think taking a position, a leadership role in that area is something I easily can do, and I will try to do that. I regret not being there for the fossil fuel special meeting, the one time, but that doesn't prevent me from advocating or working on that area, or attending conferences that are important in that area where we actually build solidarity to move ahead. I wouldn't take 4 days out of my life over a weekend to go out to conferences like that with some of the top experts in the world to understand how to do that if I wasn't interested in it.
And the other issue that Supervisor Avalos raised was in terms of your own personal investments, and there were some questions about ethics there. And again, thank you for being frank with me anyway in your discussion and explaining the differences in the different funds and so forth. And you mentioned yesterday when we were talking that, if you had known this may have been an issue to the public, you probably would not have done that. You may or may not have. But so I asked the question whether or not, if that's, then to me, it's not, I don't see that the problem is an individual problem. It's sort of an institutional problem in the sense that I encourage, I don't want to have legislative policy around this, but certainly administratively, internal to your board, to urge that during your orientation that the staff would give to new members, to actually bring these things up so they could choose whether they want to deal with that or not. I mean, sounds like if that had been brought up to you when you first started, you may not have wanted to do that. So again, I'm urging that you work with staff to make this sort of an administrative requirement for the orientation.
Well, again, you want me to address that issue of mutual funds and how they work at Zephyrs?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Complicated to me.
Yeah, it is very complicated. So there's two parts of the rule, and one part of the rule on Form 700 is that we need to disclose any private investment that we make at Zephyrs in our own portfolios. And so there was a question, because I invested in a manager called Grantham, Mayo, and Otterloo, which happens to be the advocate of understanding fossil fuels. They're very, very, very well-known manager. And so the first part of it says you need to list them on Form 700 if it's a private investment. And the investment I went into was a public investment. It was a public mutual fund, which by law you're allowed to invest in. And so when I was talking to the supervisor, I said, it was not a special investment. It was something that was more like large company stocks. I probably would have been better buying an index fund with all the heat I've had about this. But truly by the rule, I did not violate the rule because I invested in a public mutual fund, which I did not need to disclose. So you would ask me, why did I disclose this? And I disclosed this because later on I realized, at the time I was rather new in the board, and I didn't realize they had something very different with the same company invested in a emerging market bonds. So I did, large stocks. And so what I said to the supervisor is, with all the heat, I just think I would probably say, not that it's an issue, that it's wrong, but by law, but I just wouldn't. I could have bought an S&P 500 fund and not had the heat of this. It would have actually done better during that time. So in the future, I just think we need to be cognizant of that. Now, I think the director would say, but it's not a violation because it is a public investment. There was an issue of, well, it had a $10 million minimum. So you got in under the $10 million minimum. And what was established as, I think the FPPC investigated it and dropped it as no evidence that I had violated anything, because I had the ability to enter that fund 10 years prior that came on to Zephyr's board. Therefore, the second part, which is no commissioner should ever benefit personally from being on that commission. You should not get anything special due to that. It was established that I had that ability 10 years before I came onto the board. But as I said, with all the heat on that, I think I just would say I'll find another public mutual fund to invest in if I'm going to do that again. But I don't want to establish criteria for somebody else on the board. I know all of you have investments in mutual funds probably in your DC plan or things like that we own at Zephyrs. And the reason is they're mutual funds and they're public. So, thousands, millions of people can get in them. The rule is to prevent us from getting in something private, which is a limited number of people. And that's not what I had money in.
Thank you. Supervisor Campos?
Thank you very much. Thank you for that information and that explanation. Where I would disagree with you is that I don't think it's the director that has final say on whether or not you have followed the rules. Ultimately, if there's a complaint, it's actually the Ethics Commission that has that. But I do think that all of us as public officials, there's a lot of scrutiny. And again, for me, the important thing here is to make sure that we have an open discussion. And I take what you have said at face value, and I appreciate that. So I think it's simply about letting the public know that these issues are being addressed when they're raised. I just have one final question. It's actually not for you. It's actually for the city attorney, because I understand and appreciate the fact that you are, to the extent that there might be an issue with the RFP and the contract that Supervisor Avalos raised, that you would, your intent is to recuse yourself, which I think makes a great deal of sense, and I appreciate that. But just a quick question for the city attorney. There are times under Section 1090 of the Government Code when a recusal alone is not sufficient, and there is the possibility that even with a recusal, there might be an invalidation of the action by the agency. There are exceptions to that. So I would simply, as a city attorney, to comment on that. I would imagine that would not be the case here, but to the extent that were to be the case, I would imagine that the board would be informed of that. Through the chair to our city attorney.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. As you mentioned, Supervisor Campos, there's a Government Code Section 1090, that essentially says that public officials cannot have a financial interest in contracts that they approve. And the law is pretty broad and has some vague provisions and a number of exceptions. In some circumstances, an official can't recuse himself or herself when there's a conflict under Section 1090. The only answer is to either divest from the financial interest that the person has in the contract, or resign from the board. Based on what I understand from Commissioner Paskin-Jordan, she may have a conflict under Section 1090. It sounds like it probably fits into one of the exceptions that would allow for recusal, and not the kind of nuclear option that requires resignation. But of course, if Northern Trust comes back up in a contract situation, we would work closely with her to make sure that she recuses herself, if appropriate.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure that was understood, and I trust that if that issue in any way becomes a problem, that we will know. And one thing that I would say, and what I value and love about San Francisco is that we are very proud of how we would do the people's work, if you will, and it's interesting that we're talking about a position where you are volunteering your time, and we're grateful that you're willing to do that. But I think it says a lot about who we are, that even when that happens, that when you have this level of money that's being involved in the retirement of so many people, that we take this obligation seriously. And so I think it's something that we should be proud of, the fact that we can have these discussions and in the open, because I think that it's something that in the end serves not only the public, the retirees, but also the individual involved. And I think the fact that you are willing to come here and have this open discussion says a lot about you, and so it's greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. At this time, I'd like to ask if the Retirement Board staff has the answers to some of the questions that colleagues had posed earlier regarding attendance and some of the votes or motions made. Director Hewish.
Supervisors, we have verified that at the October 2013 meeting, there was a motion that was made by Supervisor Cohen to divest at level 1, and that motion failed. There was a second, but that motion failed, and then subsequent to that, there was a motion made by Commissioner Brian Stansberry, seconded by Commissioner Paskin Jordan, to direct staff to bring back a full analysis of both level 1 and level 2 divestment to a special meeting, which was a special meeting that was held in February. So the motion that she indicated that she had seconded was the second motion after the failed motion to divest, but it was to continue the discussion and direct staff to bring back a complete analysis at both level 1 and level 2 for the board's consideration.
Right. It was a motion to study level 1, level 2, for staff to look into the issue and bring it back to...
Within 90 days, that's correct.
Was that done in 90 days?
In February. We called a special meeting in order to have it outside of or earlier than our normal retirement board meeting would be.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Any further questions or discussion?
Just on that point, that's exactly what I had said. That was her motion was to study the issue, and what was being said was that it was a motion to, go to level 1, which wasn't the case. So I think we're in semantics here, but I just think it's important to speak very clearly about what it is we're talking about. And I actually have. I'm ready to support Ms. Paskin Jordan, and I really do appreciate your coming here and your patience in going through here and your time. Thank you for your service as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you. Any further comments from colleagues? Seeing none, then is there a motion on this item? Item 1.
Motion to approve or motion.
All right, so there's been a motion to approve the mayor's reappointment of Wendy Paskin Jordan to the Retirement Board, seconded by Supervisor Mark Farrell. And I'd like to just share with the public that we will not be holding public comment on this item today because we had actually held the public comment at our last board meeting and closed that. So with that, then, Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos?
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. There are 10 ayes.
Thank you. This motion to approve the mayor's reappointment is adopted unanimously. And before we move on to the next item, before we move on to the next item, I'd actually just like to recognize that we also have in our chamber with us former State Senator Art Torres. I apologize, did not see him earlier without my glasses on, but thank you for being here. All right, and so, Madam Clerk, if we can actually go to our next item, please.
The next item is a special order at 2 p.m. for the Board of Supervisors to sit as a committee of the whole, pending approval of item number 5, a hearing on the status of the labor dispute at San Francisco International Airport restaurants.
Thank you. So if we can now, colleagues, actually go to take item 5 first. So, Madam Clerk, if you called that.
Item 5 is a motion to schedule the Board of Supervisors to sit as a committee of the whole on January 7th at 2 p.m. to hold a public hearing to consider and discuss the issues arising from the labor dispute at the San Francisco International Airport restaurants.
Thank you. And for this item, I'd like to call on Supervisor Marr.
Thank you, President Tang. I was going to say, because of the hard work of...
Sorry, I would just like to ask that if people are leaving the chamber, if you could do so quietly, please. Thank you.
Thank you, President Tang. Because of the testimony of many of the airport workers from our December meeting and the hard work behind the scenes of Airport Director John Martin, and I wanted to thank Kathy Widener from the airport as well. The issues of the labor concerns were resolved with agreements that were both supported by the vendors and the workers. And Local 2 did a lot of work, but I'll just have to say that our Director John Martin and Kathy Widener did around-the-clock work to ensure that it was resolved successfully. So I'm very pleased about that. I think now there is no need to follow through with the motion, and I'm wondering whether I move to file the motion, or do we need to continue the committee of the whole at all?
So Supervisor Marr, you can make a motion to table this item, and doing so would actually also automatically dispense with item 2. First, though, we will take public comment on item 5, which is whether we should convene as a committee of the whole on this. So at this time, I'd actually, unless there's further comments from colleagues, like to see if there's any member of the public who'd like to comment on whether we should convene as a committee of the whole on the status of the labor dispute at the airport. Seeing none, then public comment is closed on this item. And now Supervisor Marr.
So I move that we file the item and really appreciate the work of the airport.
All right, that motion's been seconded by Supervisor Mark Farrell, and without objection, item 5 is tabled, and automatically item number 2 is dispensed with as well. Madam Clerk, can we please go to roll call for introductions?
The first supervisor to introduce new business is Supervisor Yee. Roll call for the introduction of new business.
Submit.
Okay. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, Happy New Year, and thank you for taking part in this meeting today. It was not typically what we would have, but I do appreciate your presence here. I have a short thing I want to discuss, what I'm interested in moving forward on this year. As we've been part of, San Francisco has been part of, we've been dealing with an affordability crisis for a number of years now, and I expect that it's going to continue again through this year. And I really believe that we need to really support a lot of the efforts of people outside of City Hall who are desperately trying to preserve housing or preserve their ability to stay in San Francisco with some policy. And I actually would like to see if we can engage in another form of a task force to look at that issue, perhaps being convened by either the controller or the budget analyst, but one that is not being driven by any one particular office, but is driven by the great need that we have to make sure that our economy can grow and lift all boats and not just a few that are being lifted in the city. And so I'd like to propose that that's something that we can engage in. I've actually talked with Todd Riedstrom in the Controller's Office. Todd, who has come from the PUC, who had previously worked at the Controller's Office, had worked on a task force that was around revenue back in 2004 under then Supervisor Fiona Ma. That revenue task force had identified a number of revenue ideas that in the past 10 years, and many of them have been implemented. One of them was moving from the payroll tax to the gross receipts tax. They were also looking at a utility user fee, which was enacted in 2008. There was a discussion about increasing the real estate transfer tax for properties over many millions of dollars. That was enacted in 2010, something that I had sponsored here at the Board of Supervisors. I think it's time that we look at another task force that can really address this all too critical issue affecting our city, and I would like to call out to the mayor, staff, and others in your offices as well to take part in this effort, one that maybe in a decade from now we can look back on as creating many of the ideas that are going to help people stay in the city, and we can look back to in pride in that effort. So I'm going to call out the controller at the mayor's office to join me in this effort, and look forward to your part in that as well, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. Supervisor Campos.
Happy New Year. Submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Farrell.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, I just have one in memoriam that I would like to adjourn today's board meeting in the memory of Merla Zellerbach. Ms. Zellerbach was a civic leader here in San Francisco, an author, a philanthropist for a long time, TV personality, former Chronicle columnist, Nob Hill Gazette editor, and a native San Franciscan and a District 2 resident. She passed away last Friday, January 2nd, 2015, at her home in San Francisco that she had occupied for over 60 years. Her philanthropy and volunteering efforts included work for Planned Parenthood, the American Cancer Society, and the Red Cross here in San Francisco. She founded SF Sponsors and Kennard House, which helps the mentally ill, co-chaired the annual Beaux Arts Ball, and was a board member of the San Francisco Art Institute, Patrons of Art and Music, the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. She was the Northern California chapter of the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation's 2012 Champion of Hope. And in 2014, just last year, the Junior League honored her for her major impact on philanthropy and volunteerism in the Bay Area. In addition to writing a newspaper column, she contributed to magazines including Cosmopolitan, Prevention, Reader's Digest, Town and Country, and Travel and Leisure. During 50 years as a journalist, she interviewed some amazing personalities such as Shirley Temple, Yves Saint Laurent, Annie Warhol, our now Senator Dianne Feinstein, Bob Hope, Hugh Hefner, Joe Montana, and Helen Brown. And she, again, was an editor of the Nob Hill Gazette from 1995 to 2007. She's survived by her husband and family, will certainly be greatly missed here in the city of San Francisco, and just want to wish all of her family very well. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. Supervisor Kim.
Happy New Year's and submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Marr.
Submit.
Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. Colleagues, today I wanted to start off by presenting a special commendation for a wonderful individual in our community, Diane Rivera. Do you want to please come on up? So, colleagues, Diane, she is one of our District 4 constituents and has, since 2003, I believe, been part of our neighborhood emergency response team. And I think that many of you probably know about NERT. It is a wonderful program housed with our San Francisco Fire Department that trains neighbors and constituents on how it is that they can be better prepared for an emergency and respond to, and help each other, given that in many of our emergencies, we have mostly each other to help us in those critical hours immediately following an emergency. So Diane has been an incredible champion of this program. In fact, she's convinced our entire office to participate in NERT trainings in our neighborhood during January. And so we're really trying to encourage all of our residents to do so as well. So it is very heartbreaking for me to say that Diane is going to be leaving the Sunset District, but also leaving San Francisco. She is going to be relocating to be closer to her grandchildren. So I'm thrilled that you're going to be closer to your family, Diane, but very sad that you're going to be leaving us. Diane has also, she was born and raised in the Sunset. She went to all the schools here. Her children went to all of our local schools in San Francisco. In addition to participating in NERT, she has helped us tremendously in the Sunset, through projects such as providing critical feedback on our Sunset District blueprint, on trying to beautify certain neighborhoods such as our turnaround at the N Judah turnaround at La Playa and Great Highway. She has just, again, done so much for our community. And so I know that we have here today our Fire Chief, Joanne Hayes-White. Thank you so much for being here because I know that she's very supportive of this program. We have Chief Ramona Williams, the Director of Training of NERT. We have, of course, Lieutenant Erica Artesteros, who has been providing these wonderful trainings to all of us. Andrea Jorgensen, also a NERT staffer. And, of course, 3 NERT volunteers, Nora Matlich, Lynn Jaklovich, and Liza Mizuko. Thank you all so much for being here and for really paying your respects to Diane. Again, I hope that all of us here will still continue your important work, despite you not being in San Francisco. And wanted to offer you, as well as our chief and if without objection, Lieutenant Artesteros, the opportunity to say a few words on your behalf. Diane?
You want me to speak?
If you would like to say a few words.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for this lovely honor. Katie, it was wonderful working with you in the Sunset. And Happy New Year, everyone. And congratulations for being the president of the board. You mentioned that this was my project, and while I was in a particular position to be able to do some of the work that I did, I have stood on the shoulders of many, many people who precede me. And
That includes prior chiefs of the fire department. It includes prior program coordinators for the NERT program. And it also includes, to some extent, and I don't know what it is, the decision of the mayor and the board of supervisors. But in my time, I would just like to say to each of you, thank you for our support. We stand on the shoulders of many, many people who precede us. And if I've been able to do anything, it's because I was in a group, the advisory board for the NERT program. I was in a group which was my own team here in the Sunset. I was with other coordinators and their teams throughout the city. And I know that you hear this many, many times. It's better to be prepared than not be prepared. We keep saying that. We want people around the city to have the opportunity to take the program. And it's just been my distinct honor to be able to push that forward. So I thank you very much for this honor.
Good. Thank you, Diane. And at this time, I'd like to invite the Chief or Lieutenant Artisteros, again without objection from colleagues, to say a few words on behalf of Diane.
Thank you, President Tang, members of the board, for this opportunity. I just wanted to echo Supervisor Tang's accolades for Diane Rivera. She's been truly a contributor to our NERT program. As you know, the NERT program was born out of the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989, when we had so many willing citizens wanting to help the fire department and the first responders. And what came of it was that we needed to provide a formalized training program. And Diane has been a champion of NERT, always very prepared. She is relocating to Carlsbad, and I was visiting with her the other day, and I said Carlsbad will be that much more prepared because she's already signed up for their program down there. So we will truly miss her. Great citizen. We're both lifelong residents, and she took her role in NERT very seriously and spread the message about the importance of always being prepared and having a plan in place well ahead of an emergency. So Diane, you will be missed, but we wish you well as you move closer to your son and his family. Thank you.
So much has already been said, but as the program coordinator, I'm guiding a partnership between our fire department and the people that live and work here in our city. And Diane has she's boosted me up as much as I've tried to boost her up. And so thank you, Diane.
Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you. And colleagues, next I have an in memoriam to present, which I would like to ask that we do so on behalf of the full Board of Supervisors. It is actually with incredible shock and sadness that today I'd like to acknowledge a dear member of our city family that we lost over the holidays, Jerry Lee, who was a member of our SFMTA Board of Directors. He was incredibly well known for his contributions to our community, and I apologize. And he served on so many nonprofit boards, which I know is where a lot of us got to know him. The United Way of the Bay Area, Self-Help for the Elderly, Chinatown Community Development Center, Cameron House, Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, Wu Yi. He has just done so much. And he joined the SFMTA Board of Directors in 2008. He was reappointed in 2011. And he served as the vice chair of that board for many, many years, and also served on the board's Policy and Governance Committee. Director Lee was the son of a restaurant cook and a seamstress. He grew up in San Francisco's Chinatown. He went to all the schools here in San Francisco and married his high school sweetheart back in 1975. Today, he is survived by his 3 children, Kimberly, Corbett, and Bennett. For over 4 decades, Director Lee, he worked at UPS. He began his career there as a loader and unloader, working part-time while he attended college. He was an incredibly dedicated employee and eventually became the manager of community affairs there. He began his public service work when he chaired Mayor Art Agnos's taxi committee, and he assisted with the establishment of the newly formed Department of Parking and Traffic. He served as an enforcement liaison and developed the management structure for PCOs as they transitioned from the SFPD to DPT. We will certainly remember him for his kind and generous spirit. On a personal note, I came to know Jerry when I was working as a legislative aide, he often invited me to many events with him, and that's how I got to know him over the years. I believe that he's like an angel on earth, and his loss and his passing was just an incredible surprise and shock to all of us. So I want to wish his family all the best, his colleagues on the MTA board, on the department, and again, we'll deeply miss him very much. And with that, I'd like to offer, I know Supervisor Yee also would like to offer some words on his behalf.
Thank you, President Tang. It's indeed a great loss that we lost Jerry. When I thought back about his background, and I always thought of him as somebody from the same neighborhood I grew up in, and how much overlap we had as we were growing up. And I actually know more about being in the community more so than being at City Hall. And like he went to Washington Irving, which is Johnny Ho Chin now, and we probably had some overlap there. Because I'm a little bit older than him, I didn't have any overlap at Francisco Junior High at the time because it's only 2 years. But he went to Galileo, where I went also, and we overlapped there. And he went to City College, where I probably was still around when he first started. But it wasn't. I mean, even though we overlapped, I never knew him before being an adult. And where I really met him was in working in the community, whether it's in the Chinese New Year parade. I mean, he's like your, how do you say it? It's almost like you can't have a parade without Jerry. He's done it ever since he was probably in college. I mean, for many, many years, he just kept on doing this. And that's the type of commitment and type of person I found him to be, somebody from the community that didn't turn his back from the community. He continued to, as he served citywide, continued to be serving on a lot of boards in the community in Chinatown. And when I saw him at events, when I was working in the community, events after events after events, I finally asked, who is this guy? Why is he in every event? And I said, I want him on my board because I was the executive director of WuYi Children's Services at the time. And I eventually convinced him to be on the board, and I was so glad to get him on there because he was such a bundle of energy, always cared about our children and our parents and our families. I remember the first time when he was able to, and this is the type of, again, this describes what he is. He worked at UPS, loading trucks, eventually climbed up the ladder and was able to be the liaison with community members. And although he had a pretty large portfolio in terms of who the region that he would have to pay attention to in regards to the UPS giving, he didn't forget the community where he came from. So one day he said, something, we're going to do something for preschoolers, and we're going to do it for WuYi Children's Services. So I go down to UPS, and he's dressed in his brown uniform, and he starts talking about, as if I never worked there before, because he didn't know. And I said, oh, by the way, Jerry, I just want to tell you I'm coming home today, because I worked here in the late 60s, loading trucks just like you did. So I'm going to really miss him. I think many people in the community will really miss him, and I think a lot of people at City Hall will really miss him. I want to send my condolences to his family. Corbett, who's one of the sons, went to school with my daughter, and Beverly, his wife, was a friend, my childhood friend. I knew that family very well, and her sister and so forth. So, like I said, we're going to miss him. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim?
I also met Jerry when I was a youth organizer at Chinatown Community Development Center. In one of my first years, he actually organized UPS to do a big fundraiser for our organization at the time, and we had all volunteered at this great event. And it's in many ways how many of us met Jerry was because of his service to his neighborhood and community and his immense investment to making sure that he was always giving back to the neighborhood that he grew up in. I was really privileged to work with Jerry all those years, and then when I joined the Board of Supervisors, he was already serving as a director on the board of SFMTA. And what an incredible service he's provided to our city and our communities. We fight for individuals like Jerry in the private sector, and we fight for folks in the private sector to be like Jerry, someone who understands the city that they are a part of. Jerry is always committed to making sure that they were hiring locally, understanding that UPS were really, really good jobs for so many folks, whether it was in the Tenderloin or Chinatown or the Bayview. Every time there were job openings, Jerry would email our office and ask us if we knew individuals that could use this incredible opportunity to be employed in our city. And he was always looking for organizations to fund that were doing good work. He did a lot for Glide Church in the Tenderloin. And it was just in his heart. He didn't do it because the community pressured him to, because there was an advocacy effort to get someone like him hired or to push for that. That wasn't even his job area, but he made it his passion. And UPS is an incredible partner in San Francisco because of Jerry Lee. There is a huge void that we will see in his passing, in his leadership. And I will really miss his heart the most. He was so sincere and dedicated in his mission to make sure that everyone could enjoy the opportunities and privileges that he had fought for in his life. And I just want to thank him for his service. His passing was a huge shock to so many of us in the community and our office. And we depended on his voice on SFMTA to fight for pedestrian safety and to fight for Muni for our low-income communities, our youth, and our seniors. And I just want to thank him and his family for his work and just recognize the loss that we are feeling all.
Thank you. Supervisor Marr.
Thank you, President Tang, for allowing us some time to talk about Jerry. I'll miss him as well. I think no greater example of a public servant than Jerry. Condolences to his children and his family. I think I met him during the Agnos administration years ago. That's probably over 25 years ago. And but just seeing him supporting all the community-based groups, but on a leadership level at the city, the amazing work with the MTA and on the board, to the CAC of the regional MTC, and taxi work within the late 80s and 90s, but just tremendous work and commitments to our city. And I'll miss him tremendously, and I really thank him and his family for his contributions to our city.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr. I also wanted just to announce that there will be a memorial service for Director Lee this Sunday, January 11th. It will take place at Francisco Middle School between 10:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. The family has asked that if you have any great funny stories about Director Lee to bring those forth, and as well as to come in any giant scares. He was a huge fan. So with that, I submit thank you.
Thank you, President Kim. President Tang. Supervisor Kim.
That's okay.
Supervisor Kim. Roll call for the introduction of new business. Oh, submit. Okay. Supervisor Marr.
Submit.
President Tang. Supervisor Wiener. Madam President, that concludes the roll call for the introduction of new business.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to, Madam Clerk, if we can go. Oh, Supervisor Cohen.
You skipped me. It's okay.
Oh, my apologies, Supervisor Cohen. Your staff took you off roll call today.
Submit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Madam President.
Thank you. And now, if we can, Madam Clerk, go to general public comment.
The next opportunity is the general public period for the public to speak about matters within the jurisdiction of the board. First speaker, please.
Good afternoon, members of the board. and fellow residents. First, I want to introduce myself. My name is Larry Blake. I've lived in San Francisco for the last 35 years of my life, in particular residing in the Castro since 1983, continually till today.
Oh, thank you.
And the issue I'm bringing forward, I have emailed a letter to each of the supervisors and the mayor, and it regards the Castro Cares program that I know my district supervisor Wiener is very much a part of. So first I'd like to read the letter I have. I can also post one here, I guess. Where does this go?
SFG TV, please.
Recently I received a pamphlet in the mail addressed to local postal customer titled Castro Cares. Several claims stated as facts therein, I think, are observations based on opinions. Since they are not facts, but instead opinions, I wish to register my disagreement with them. The idea contained in the pamphlet that an affluent neighborhood is allowed to buy additional city services, including San Francisco police officers and ours, I find abhorrent. Such a policy reeks of racism and classism and is rife with the entrenchment of inequality that can tear a neighborhood apart. I see my time's running out quickly, so the letter's before you. Specifically, as I said, feel dedicated police services should be not privy to this kind of funding. I do support many of the other parts of Castro Cares, like outreach to the homeless and drug addicts in the neighborhood. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
President Tang and other victims of the cabal, my name is Christopher Dahl, and I live at 6th and Howard, 14 meters and 10 blocks from current sea level. I rise to comment on the price of a roof in our beloved city and county of San Francisco. For the last 40 years, more or less, I've been listening to a litany, a chorus, a veritable choir of complaint about the amount of money it takes to put a roof over one's head in our fair city. In that 40-year span, the population of the world has gone from 2 billion to almost 8 billion. It's reasonable to assume that the same proportion of those people want to live here now as wanted to live here then. That is to say, the demand for housing in San Francisco has grown by a factor of 400%. At the same time, the price per bedroom has gone from about $400 per month to about $1,600 per month, an increase of 400%, the same as the demand. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so. It's an issue of supply and demand. We are watching the price of oil fall as demand falls and supply goes up. We could watch the price of housing fall if demand fell, like after a major earthquake, or the price could stabilize after a major increase in supply. The problem in San Francisco is that the supply of housing has only gone up about 30% in the last 40 years, and that is nowhere near enough to satisfy demand. So how can we supply the supply side of this imbalance? We can turn Treasure Island into Manhattan. We can deck or bury the streets and increase buildable surface area by 40%. We can build 5-story houseboats and moor them along our coast, or we can just wait for the next earthquake and let it work on the demand side. Thank you, President Tong.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you so much, President Tang and members of the board, for this opportunity to speak. My name is Jackie Naylor. I'm a jazz vocalist living in the Rube Goldberg building for 25 years. That's in Hayes Valley. The building is being proposed for landmark designation, unanimously approved by the Historic Preservation Commission and on your agenda today as a proposed ordinance. I want to thank you for your consideration of this beautiful building for landmark designation. The building was commissioned by inventor and Pulitzer Prize winner, cartoonist Rube Goldberg, and designed by well-known theater architect Bernard J. Joseph in 1911. I feel very honored to live in the building, which actually has Rube Goldberg's name engraved into the top of the building.
I also live alongside my dear friend and neighbor, also a fellow tenant, Beverly Upton, who is the executive director of the San Francisco Domestic Violence Consortium. Beverly and I have also been in touch with the Goldberg family, in particular one of his grandchildren, who recently published a best-selling book about her grandfather. And the family is also in great support of landmarking this treasure of a building. So again, I really want to thank you so much for your consideration, and thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public?
Thank you. Excuse me, Tom Gilberti, 2000 South Beach Marina Apartments, which opened 26 years ago last August. My parents moved in November of 1988. I moved in December of 1988. I've been there ever since. 2 years ago, my rent check increased by $390. Last year, it increased by $390, but they took $100 off because of the construction was at 72 Townsend was brutal and illegal. And this year, in 3 weeks, my rent check will go up by $400. These are robber baron rates. 100 years ago, Theodore Roosevelt, robber barons, now they're living and doing very well in San Francisco. Yes, high rents across the nation. We don't have to follow the nation. We don't have to study. We need to do something. We need to do a little bit better. And it looks like the economic tsunamis from Silicon Valley are just going to continue unless we do something to help us along. 30 years ago, South Beach Marina Apartments got $44 million from the state issued by redevelopment in the city. In January 1st of this year, there are the 60 units of below market rate apartments will expire, and of the 83 that we have, we'll only have 23 left in a year and a half. These are the only people that have stayed in the area for a long time. Do we want to have housing, or do we want to make investments for rich people and folks that live outside of the area? I believe we need to make a turnaround and help the people that are living in homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak during public comment? Seeing none, public comment is now closed. Madam Clerk, can you now read the in memoriams?
Yes, Madam President. Today's meeting will be adjourned in memory of the following individuals. On behalf of Supervisor Farrell, for the late Mrs. Merla Zellerbach, and at the suggestion of President Tang, on behalf of the entire Board of Supervisors, for the late Commissioner Jerry Lee.
Thank you. And I would like to, at this time, thank SFGov TV, Jonathan Stockus, and Jesse Larson. And Madam Clerk, is there any further business before the board?
That concludes our business for today.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.